The morning sun cast long shadows through the crystalline structure of the Viridian embassy, its translucent walls refracting light in ways that still captivated Professor James Harrison after 3 months of regular visits. He adjusted his tie, a nervous habit that had intensified since the aliens' arrival 6 months ago. The security scanner hummed as it recognized his biosignature, allowing him entry into the inner chamber where Ambassador Kelvin awaited. The Viridian's iridescent skin shifted through shades of blue and green as she rose to greet him. Despite their decidedly non-human appearance, James had grown accustomed to their elegant, elongated forms and the gentle phosphorescence that seemed to pulse with their emotions. What he hadn't grown accustomed to was the weight of responsibility that came with being Earth's leading xenobiologist in this unprecedented era of first contact. Professor Harrison, Kelvin's voice resonated with the musical quality characteristic of her species. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Her large, almond-shaped eyes fixed on him with an intensity that suggested more than their usual scientific discussions lay ahead. James settled into the organically curved chair that formed itself to his body. Your message mentioned a proposal of significant importance to both our species. I must admit, I'm intrigued. Kelvin's skin rippled with bands of deeper blue, a sign of solemnity James had learned to recognize. What I am about to share with you has been debated extensively among our Council of Elders. It is not a request we make lightly. The atmosphere in the room seemed to thicken as Kelvin activated a holographic display between them. Images of Viridian children appeared, their forms similar to adults but smaller, more delicate. Our species has achieved remarkable technological advancement, but we face a crisis that threatens our very existence. Our genetic diversity is declining at an alarming rate. James leaned forward, his scientific curiosity piqued. I wasn't aware your species was experiencing genetic difficulties. Your medical technology seems far advanced beyond ours. Technology alone cannot solve everything, Professor. We need new blood, so to speak. Our studies of human genetics have revealed remarkable adaptability and resilience. We believe a human child, raised among our people, could be the key to our survival, and to a lasting bond between our civilizations. The implications hit James like a physical force. You're talking about adoption? An interspecies adoption? Yes, Kelvin's skin pulsed with gentle gold tones. Hope, James had learned. But not just any child. We need someone young enough to adapt to our environment, with specific genetic markers that would make integration possible. Our research has identified several candidates, but one stands out above all others. James felt a chill run down his spine as Kelvin projected another image, one he knew all too well. His son, Thomas, 8 years old, with his mother's curly red hair and James's green eyes, smiled back at him from the hologram. Thomas Harrison possesses a unique genetic profile we've never seen before. The combination of certain recessive traits and adaptive markers in his DNA makes him ideal for this purpose. Kelvin's voice softened. We understand the magnitude of what we're asking, especially from you, Professor. As a leading scientist, you understand the importance of this request. As a father, we know this must be overwhelming. James stared at his son's image, memories flooding his mind. Rachel's death 3 years ago had left them both adrift until science, and the arrival of the Viridians, had given them new purpose. Thomas had always been special, showing an intuitive understanding of complex concepts that sometimes startled even his father. The boy's fascination with the Viridians was boundless. He peppered James with questions after every embassy visit. What exactly would this entail? James heard himself ask, his voice barely steady. Thomas would be adopted into one of our most respected families. He would receive the finest education, learning both our ways and maintaining his connection to human culture. He would be treated as one of our own while serving as a bridge between our peoples. Most importantly, his presence could help us develop the genetic solutions we need to ensure our species' survival. And his safety? His health? Our environmental adaptation technology would ensure his comfort and well-being. He would have regular medical monitoring, and our scientists would work to optimize his living conditions. You would be able to maintain contact through our quantum communication network. James stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the sprawling human city beyond. The contrast between the sleek Viridian architecture and the urban landscape of steel and glass seemed to epitomize the choice before him. I need time to think about this. To talk to Thomas. Of course, Kelvin rose gracefully. But please understand, time is a luxury we cannot afford in abundance. Our genetic crisis worsens with each passing generation. We need an answer within one Earth month. As James left the embassy, his mind churned with conflicting emotions. The scientist in him understood the magnificent opportunity this represented, not just for Thomas, but for both species. The father in him recoiled at the thought of sending his only child to live among aliens, no matter how advanced or well-intentioned. That evening, he watched Thomas playing in their backyard, the boy's laughter carrying through the open window as he enacted some imaginative scenario involving space exploration. Since Rachel's death, Thomas had shown a resilience that amazed James, but also a loneliness that no amount of fatherly love seemed to fill. "Dad!" Thomas called out, waving enthusiastically. "Come look at what I discovered." James stepped outside to find his son crouched over a small anthill, watching the insects with fascination. They work together like the Viridians, don't they? All connected, all helping each other. Did you know the Viridians can change colors like chameleons? I read about it in your research papers. Looking at his son's eager face, James felt the weight of destiny settling around them. He had always taught Thomas that science was about exploring the unknown, about making sacrifices for the greater good. Now, fate had handed them both the ultimate test of those principles. "Thomas," he said softly, sitting down beside his son, "how would you like to visit the embassy with me tomorrow? There's something important we need to discuss with Ambassador Kelvin." The boy's eyes lit up with excitement, unaware that he stood at the threshold of a decision that would change not just his life, but the future of two civilizations. As the sun set behind them, James wondered if he had the strength to make the choice that logic told him was right, but his heart fought against with every beat. The Viridian embassy seemed different through Thomas's eyes. Where James saw the weight of diplomatic relations and scientific responsibility, his son saw magic in every shimmer of the crystalline walls and every ripple of light. Thomas practically bounced beside him as they walked through the security checkpoint, his small hand warm in James's larger one. Ambassador Kelvin had arranged for them to meet Riven, one of the Viridian's leading childhood development specialists. As they entered the meeting chamber, James noticed how the usually austere room had been modified, comfortable cushions in bright colors dotted the floor, and holographic displays showed scenes from both Earth and the Viridian homeworld. "Welcome, Thomas Harrison," Riven's form glowed with gentle pink tones, excitement and warmth, James had learned. Unlike Kelvin's diplomatic reserve, Riven's movements were animated and engaging. "We have heard so much about you from your father." Thomas stared in wide-eyed wonder, squeezing James's hand but not hiding behind him as many children might have. "Your skin, it's like the northern lights Dad showed me in his astronomy books." Riven's laugh chimed like crystal bells. "And your hair is like the sacred flames of our sun temples. Would you like to learn about where I come from?" For the next 2 hours, James watched as Riven introduced Thomas to Viridian culture through interactive holograms and gentle conversation. The specialist showed him their floating cities, the great libraries where their history was stored in crystalline matrices, and the schools where young Viridians learned to harness their natural bioluminescence. "Dad, look!" Thomas called out repeatedly, his excitement growing with each new discovery. "They can communicate through colors. And their buildings grow like plants." His natural curiosity and lack of fear seemed to delight Riven, whose skin rippled with increasingly vibrant patterns. During a break where Thomas was occupied with an educational game, Riven approached James. "Your son is remarkable. His neural plasticity readings are off the charts, and his intuitive grasp of our conceptual frameworks exceeds our most optimistic projections." "He's always been quick to learn," James replied, watching Thomas interact with a holographic representation of Viridian wildlife. "But I have concerns about his emotional well-being. Since his mother died." "We understand the depth of this transition." Riven's colors shifted to deeper, more serious tones. "That is why we have selected the Naira family to be his potential guardians. They have extensive experience with trauma healing and adaptive psychology." As if on cue, the chamber's door dissolved, revealing a Viridian family unit. The parent figures, Theron and Lyra Naira, entered with their young daughter Astra, who appeared to be close to Thomas's age equivalent. Where most Viridians James had met maintained careful control over their bioluminescence, Astra's skin flickered with unbridled curiosity as she spotted Thomas. "Greetings, Professor Harrison." Theron's voice carried the deeper resonance of male Viridians. "We hope to meet both you and Thomas today. Our daughter has been quite eager since learning of this possibility." James watched as Astra approached Thomas, their initial interaction carrying the universal awkwardness of children meeting for the first time. But then Thomas showed her the game he was playing, and within minutes, they were engrossed in conversation, with Thomas teaching Astra Earth games while she showed him how to create simple light patterns with the holographic interface. "The capacity for connection transcends species," Lyra observed, her tone gentle. "We would not seek to replace Thomas's family, Professor Harrison. Rather, we hope to expand it. Our culture values the preservation of heritage alongside the embrace of new bonds." Over the next few weeks, James found himself spending more time at the embassy, watching as Thomas flourished in his interactions with the Viridians. The boy's nightmares, frequent since Rachel's death, began to decrease. He talked excitedly about Astra's stories of her homeworld and the games they played together. But the situation beyond the embassy walls grew increasingly complex. News of the Viridians' genetic crisis had leaked to the press, spawning wild theories and political tensions. James faced scrutiny from his colleagues, some of whom viewed his cooperation with the aliens with suspicion. "The Viridians are clearly manipulating you," his department head, Director Matthews, warned during a particularly heated meeting. "Using your personal situation to gain advantage. Think about what you're considering, James. Sending a human child to live among aliens? The public would never accept it." "With all due respect, Director, the public's acceptance isn't my primary concern," James replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "The potential benefits to both species." "Benefits?" Matthews scoffed. "Or are you just looking for a way to escape your responsibilities as a father?" The accusation stung, but that evening, as James watched Thomas and Astra playing in the embassy's botanical garden, he saw something that helped cement his growing conviction. The two children had created a game that blended Earth's hopscotch with a Viridian light-stepping dance, their laughter transcending any barrier of species or culture. "Dad!" Thomas called out, his face flushed with excitement. "Astra showed me how they learn mathematics through dance. It's like the patterns are alive. Can we visit their school someday? Please?" Later that night, as James tucked Thomas into bed, his son asked the question that had been brewing for weeks. "The Viridians want me to live with them, don't they? That's why we've been visiting so much." James sat heavily on the edge of the bed, caught off guard by his son's perceptiveness. "How did you know?" "I heard Astra talking about it with her parents. She's excited but worried I might say no." Thomas sat up, his expression serious beyond his years. "Would Mom want me to go?" The question hit James like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, remembering Rachel's passion for discovery, her belief that understanding other cultures was the key to human growth. "Your mother believed in exploring the unknown, in being brave enough to take chances that could help others. But this has to be your choice, Thomas. No one can make it for you. But you'd be alone, Thomas whispered, and James heard the echo of his own fears in his son's voice. I'll never be alone as long as I know you're out there, learning and growing. James pulled his son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. As Thomas drifted off to sleep, James stood at the window, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there was the Viridian homeworld, possibly his son's future home. The weight of tomorrow pressed heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time since Rachel's death, he felt the stirring of hope that their sacrifice might mean something greater than their own pain. The holographic display in the embassy's research wing cast ethereal patterns across the faces of those gathered around it. James leaned forward, his scientific mind racing to process the complex genetic data the Viridians were sharing. Beside him, Dr. Riven's skin had taken on the deep indigo of concentrated focus. This is the progression of our genetic deterioration over the past 3 centuries, Riven explained, manipulating the display to show a devastating downward trend. Each generation shows a 15% increase in genetic instability. Within 4 generations, our ability to reproduce will be compromised beyond recovery. James watched as simulated projections played out various scenarios. And your attempts at genetic engineering haven't helped? We've exhausted every possibility within our own genetic framework, Theron added, joining them at the display. Our species evolved with a remarkable ability to adapt to environmental changes through bioluminescent communication and biological quantum entanglement. But this same adaptation has led to an evolutionary dead end. The next series of projections showed Thomas's unique genetic markers, highlighting sequences that seemed to pulse with possibility. Your son's DNA contains something we lost millennia ago: chaos, randomness, the ability to make evolutionary leaps that we can no longer achieve naturally. A soft chime interrupted their discussion as Lyra entered with Thomas and Astra. The children had been attending cultural exchange sessions, learning each other's languages and customs. Thomas's face lit up when he saw his father, but James noticed he no longer ran to him immediately. Instead, he finished showing Astra something in the book they were sharing. "Dad, Astra taught me about quantum biology today," Thomas exclaimed when they finally approached. "Did you know Viridians can share memories through light patterns? It's like their whole history is alive inside them." "Indeed it is," Lyra's skin rippled with maternal pride. "And Thomas has shown remarkable aptitude for understanding our bioluminescent language. His neural plasticity allows him to perceive patterns that even some of our own children struggle with." James watched as Thomas demonstrated a simple light-reading exercise, his face scrunched in concentration as he interpreted the colors flowing across Astra's skin. The children had developed their own hybrid communication system, blending verbal language with primitive light signals that Thomas could understand through subtle changes in color intensity. Later that evening, in a private meeting chamber, Ambassador Kelvin shared the full scope of their crisis. "What we haven't made public is the acceleration of the deterioration. Our latest models suggest we have less time than initially calculated. Without intervention, the next generation may be our last." The weight of this revelation settled heavily in James's chest. "Why us? Why Earth? Surely in all the galaxies you've explored. We've searched for centuries." Kelvin's skin dimmed to a somber gray. "Humans are unique in our experience. Your species' genetic adaptability, coupled with your capacity for emotional connection and intellectual growth, makes you ideal candidates." "And Thomas?" Her colors shifted to that now familiar gold of hope. "Thomas represents the perfect bridge between our peoples." A soft knock interrupted them. Astra stood in the doorway, her skin pulsing with anxiety. "Forgive the interruption, but Thomas is experiencing distress in the meditation garden." James found his son sitting beneath the luminescent flora that filled the embassy's garden space, tears streaming down his face. "I had a dream about Mom," Thomas whispered as James sat beside him. "She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand her." Your mother was the bravest person I've ever known, James said softly, pulling his son close. She believed that understanding others was the greatest gift we could give the universe. The Viridians are dying, aren't they? Thomas asked suddenly, surprising James with his perception. That's why they need help. I've been watching their colors when they think I'm not paying attention. They're scared. James felt a surge of pride at his son's insight. Yes, they are. But it's not your responsibility to. Mom always said we have to help people when we can, Thomas interrupted, wiping his eyes. And the Viridians, they're not just aliens anymore, are they? Astra is my friend. Her family has been kinder to us than anyone since Mom died. Through the garden's crystalline walls, James could see Theron and Lyra waiting respectfully at a distance, their colors muted in concern. Astra had pressed her hand against the barrier, her skin glowing with a gentle rhythm that James had come to recognize as their equivalent of a heartbeat. I want to help them, Dad, Thomas said firmly, his young voice carrying the weight of a decision far beyond his years. But I'm scared too. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't save them? Oh, Thomas, James pulled his son closer, you've already changed them just by being yourself. I see it every day in how they respond to you, how you and Astra have created something entirely new in the way you communicate. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent commotion from the embassy's main hall. Director Matthews had arrived with a team of government officials, demanding to speak with the Viridian leadership about unauthorized genetic experimentation on human subjects. James watched through the garden's walls as Kelvin met with the delegation, her diplomatic calm unwavering even as Matthews's voice rose in accusation. The other officials looked uncomfortable, caught between political pressure and the obvious benefits of Viridian cooperation. They're afraid, Thomas observed, watching the scene unfold. Just like the Viridians, but in a different way. Mom used to say fear makes people forget how to be kind. James looked at his son with wonder, struck by the wisdom in those words. In that moment, he saw not just his 8-year-old boy, but a bridge between worlds, someone who could help both species move past their fears towards something greater. Astra had managed to slip away from her parents and joined them in the garden. Without words, she sat next to Thomas, her skin glowing with patterns that James had learned meant comfort and friendship. Thomas responded by humming a lullaby Rachel used to sing, and Astra's bioluminescence synchronized with the melody, creating a beautiful harmony of light and sound. Watching them, James understood that what they were witnessing was more than just an interspecies adoption or a scientific solution to genetic degradation. It was the beginning of a true fusion between two civilizations, starting with the pure, unbridled connection between two children who saw beyond the boundaries of species and space. As the argument continued in the main hall, this quiet moment in the garden felt like a glimpse into a possible future, one where fear gave way to understanding, and differences became strengths rather than barriers. The weight of tomorrow seemed a little lighter, carried on the shoulders of those willing to bridge the vast distances between stars and hearts. The protest outside the Viridian embassy had grown larger over the past week. James could hear their chants even through the crystal walls, "Protect our children" and "Humans for humanity." He watched as Thomas and Astra observed the crowd from the safety of the upper chamber, their faces pressed against the transparent barrier. "I don't understand," Thomas said softly. "Why are they so angry? The Viridians are sharing their medicine with us. They've helped so many people already." He was right. In the past month, Viridian medical technology had revolutionized treatment for several genetic diseases on Earth. Their gesture of goodwill had started with children's hospitals, healing conditions that human medicine had deemed incurable. Yet fear and suspicion continued to overshadow these achievements. "Change frightens people," James explained, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Especially when it involves something as precious as children." Ambassador Kelvin entered the chamber, her usual serene glow dimmed by concern. "Professor Harrison, the World Health Organization representatives have arrived." They're requesting a full briefing on the genetic integration process. The meeting room was tense with unspoken accusations as James presented the data. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the WHO's chief geneticist, studied the holographic projections with barely concealed amazement. The implications of this technology are staggering, she admitted, watching a simulation of how Thomas's genetic material could help stabilize Viridian DNA. But the ethical considerations of sending a child. My son, James interrupted firmly, who has made his own choice. A child cannot make such a momentous decision, argued Dr. Benjamin Walsh, the WHO's ethical oversight director. This is unprecedented. There are no protocols, no guidelines for interspecies adoption. The psychological implications alone. The door dissolved, revealing Thomas and Theron. The Viridian's skin pulsed with protective patterns as he guided Thomas into the room. Perhaps, Theron suggested, you should hear from Thomas himself. James felt pride swell in his chest as his son stood before the panel of experts. Thomas had grown in the past months, not just in height but in confidence. His time with the Viridians had given him a perspective unique in human history. I know you're worried about me, Thomas began, his voice cleared despite his nervousness. But the Viridians aren't taking me away, they're giving me a chance to help both our peoples. Astra and her family have shown me that being different doesn't mean we can't be family. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. But surely you understand the risks? You would be the first human to live on their world. Mom always said that someone has to be first, Thomas replied, his green eyes bright with determination. She was the first woman to develop quantum biology protocols for deep space missions. She believed in taking risks that could help others. The mention of Rachel sent a bittersweet pang through James's heart. She would have been proud of their son's courage, his willingness to embrace the unknown. Later that evening, as protests continued outside, James found himself in the embassy's communications center with Lyra. The quantum entanglement array hummed softly as it displayed a three-dimensional map of the journey Thomas would take. The passage will take 3 Earth months, Lyra explained, her colors shifting through gentle, reassuring patterns. Thomas will be in biological stasis for most of the journey, monitored constantly by our most experienced medical team. Astra has requested to undergo stasis simultaneously, to emerge at the same time as Thomas. She doesn't have to do that, James said, touched by the young Viridian's dedication to his son. It was her choice. Our children understand sacrifice and unity from an early age. Lyra's skin rippled with emotion. What your son is doing for us, there are no words in your language or ours to express our gratitude. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert. Director Matthews had called an emergency press conference, publicly denouncing the Viridian adoption program as alien abduction sanctioned by compromised scientists. The news spread quickly, causing chaos. James's university colleagues began distancing themselves, and suspicious agents started following him and Thomas. The pressure mounted until one night, when James woke to find government vehicles surrounding their home. Dad? Thomas stood in the doorway of his father's room, clutching the family photo album he'd been preparing to take with him. It's okay, James assured him, already reaching for the secure communicator the Viridians had provided. We knew this might happen. Remember the plan? Within minutes, a Viridian transport had quietly landed in their backyard, its advanced stealth systems rendering it invisible to Earth surveillance. Theron and Lyra helped them board quickly, while Astra embraced Thomas with glowing arms. The WHO committee has approved the program, Ambassador Kelvin announced as they reached the embassy. Director Matthews acted without authority. Still, we must accelerate our timeline. The journey must begin tonight. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. James helped Thomas pack his few permitted possessions, the photo album, Rachel's old research notebook, and a quantum tablet containing Earth's history and culture. In the embassy's launching bay, Thomas stood brave but trembling in his adapted environmental suit. The Viridian crystal technology had been modified to accommodate his human physiology, making the suit look like flowing liquid starlight. "Dad?" Thomas's voice wavered for the first time. "Will you be okay?" James knelt before his son, fighting back tears. "I'll be fine. The Viridians have given me a quantum communicator. We can talk every day, see each other through the holographic interface. And in a few years, once the integration is successful, I can visit. Promise you won't be alone? Promise you'll let Dr. Rodriguez keep checking on you?" James smiled through his tears at his son's concern. "I promise. And you promise me something too, remember who you are. You're Thomas Harrison, son of Earth and soon to be a child of two worlds. Your mother would be so proud of you." The launching bay hummed with energy as final preparations were made. Astra and Thomas would travel together in a specially designed stasis pod, their vital signs linked through Viridian biotechnology. The pod itself looked like a cocoon of light, promising transformation and rebirth. As James watched his son step into the pod with Astra, he felt the weight of history pressing down on them all. This wasn't just a father's sacrifice or a child's journey, it was humanity's first true step into a larger universe, led by a boy who saw hope where others saw only fear. The last thing James saw before the pod sealed was Thomas and Astra holding hands, their figures gradually obscured by the shimmer of stasis fields. As the transport vessel prepared for launch, James stood with Theron and Lyra, three parents united in love for their children and hope for their people's future. Above them, the stars beckoned, promising not an ending, but a new beginning for both their worlds. 5 years later. The quantum communication chamber in the Viridian embassy hummed with familiar energy as James adjusted his tie. Some habits never changed, even after all these years. The holographic interface sparkled to life, and suddenly the room was filled with the presence of his son. Thomas, now 13, stood tall in his Viridian attire, his red hair longer and styled in the elaborate braids that marked him as a member of the Naira family. His skin had a subtle luminescence to it now, a side effect of the genetic integration that had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. "Dad!" Thomas's smile was as bright as ever, though his voice had begun to develop the musical qualities of Viridian speech. "Wait until you hear what happened in the quantum biology symposium today." James leaned forward in his chair, drinking in the sight of his son. These daily conversations had become the rhythm of his life, marking time between their increasingly frequent in-person visits. "Tell me everything." "The genetic stabilization process is working even better than we hoped," Thomas explained, his hands moving in the elegant gestures he'd adopted from his new culture. "The first generation of Viridian children born with the modified sequences are showing none of the deterioration markers. Astra says we're making history, but honestly, Dad, I just love seeing the baby's light patterns. They're so bright now." As if summoned by her name, Astra appeared beside Thomas in the hologram, her crystalline features more mature but still carrying that same infectious joy. Her skin rippled with the complex patterns of advanced Viridian communication, but she spoke in English out of courtesy to James. "Uncle James," she greeted him, the term of endearment still warming his heart years later. Thomas is being modest. His research on human Viridian genetic compatibility has opened up possibilities we never imagined. The Council of Elders is proposing to establish an entire institute based on his work. James watched as Thomas blushed, his skin flickering with embarrassed pleasure, another sign of how complete his integration had become. "Mom's old research notes helped a lot," Thomas said softly. Her theories about quantum biology were decades ahead of their time. "Sometimes when I'm in the laboratory, I feel like she's there with me, helping me understand." The conversation shifted to other topics, Thomas's continued Earth studies, his growing role as a cultural ambassador, and the latest developments in the exchange program that had followed in his footsteps. After the success of his integration, other human families had come forward, offering their children as bridges between the worlds. Each case was carefully evaluated, but the path Thomas had pioneered made the journey easier for those who followed. "The new arrival ceremony is next week," Thomas reminded him. "You're still coming, right? The quantum transport they've developed makes the journey so much faster now." "I wouldn't miss it," James assured him. His visits to the Viridian homeworld had become more frequent as their transportation technology improved. Each time, he was struck by how naturally Thomas moved through that alien landscape, equally at home among the crystal spires and quantum gardens as he had been on Earth. After saying goodbye, James walked through the embassy gardens where his son had once played. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for him there, her role having evolved from skeptical observer to passionate advocate for human-Viridian cooperation. "The latest medical applications are revolutionary," she reported, showing him data on her tablet. "The genetic therapy derived from Thomas's integration process has cured 3 previously terminal conditions this month alone. The WHO is calling it the greatest medical advancement in human history." James nodded, remembering the protesters who had once stood outside these walls. They had been replaced by people seeking hope, parents with sick children, patients with genetic disorders, scientists eager to learn. The fear had given way to understanding, just as Thomas had believed it would. That evening, in his study at home, James opened the quantum tablet that contained his personal logs. He had documented every step of their journey, from that first impossible choice to the triumph of seeing his son flourish among the stars. The Viridians had helped him publish a version of their story, carefully edited to protect sensitive information, but capturing the heart of their experience. A soft chime announced an unexpected call. The holographic interface revealed Theron and Lyra, their familiar forms bringing a smile to James's face. "We wanted to share something with you," Lyra said, her colors dancing with excitement. "The Council has made their decision. The first interspecies university will be built, dedicated to continuing the work Thomas and Astra began. They wish to name it after Rachel." James felt tears well up in his eyes. She would have loved that. She always believed science should bring people together, not drive them apart. "Your family has given our people a future," Theron said solemnly. "But more than that, you've given us understanding. Thomas hasn't just saved our genetics, he's taught us how to hope again, how to embrace change instead of fearing it." Later that night, James stood at his window, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, his son was probably doing the same thing, perhaps standing with Astra in one of their quantum gardens. The distance between them was vast, but their connection remained unbroken, strengthened by the purpose they had found in their sacrifice. In his mind, he could hear Rachel's voice, speaking the words she had lived by: "The greatest discoveries come from the courage to reach beyond what we know, to trust that understanding is worth any distance we must travel." Thomas had traveled farther than she could have imagined, carrying her spirit of discovery with him. And in doing so, he had helped create something greater than either human or Viridian civilization could have achieved alone, a bridge between worlds, built on the foundation of a father's love and a child's courage to embrace the unknown. As a new day dawned on Earth, James knew that somewhere across the galaxy, a new generation of children, both human and Viridian, were growing up without the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. They would inherit a universe where difference was not a divide but a source of strength, where sacrifice could lead to salvation, and where the bonds of family could stretch across the stars themselves. Thomas had not just been the key to the Viridian survival, he had become the first chapter in a new story, one that would continue to unfold long after James was gone. And in that knowledge, he found peace, knowing that his son's journey had only just begun.